Howdy, 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 this is Ryan Acid Heads Murphy coming to you with a topic I don't really touch on very often, the Total War games, um, because I can't really play them. My computers are too old, I can't play them and record them, and even Rome, the original one, doesn't play very well on, my one computer that I usually use for playing games. They're just old. They're like 10 years old now, the computers, and they weren't made for gaming to start with. So, and I'm hoping to get a new computer in the next few months, and hopefully I'll be able to play the new Total War games and record them. It'd be at lower settings, but I should be able to play and record. And definitely the older games I'd be able to play and record, which will be fun. But that's why I don't really touch on the Total War games too much, because I can't play them, so I don't have much to talk about. I just watch other people play. Heir of Carthage and Lionheart being the two that I watch most. So, I've really been enjoying the Kings expansion. I actually watch many wargaming and tabletop tactics for tabletop gaming as well, so I am familiar with Warhammer even before the Total War games came out. Actually, when I was in high school, and we're talking late 90s here, I bought one of the starter sets for Warhammer Fantasy. It was Bretonnians and Orcs, and I bought the Undead book, and that was the army I wanted to pursue, but I never really did. Just didn't have the money. Working a teenager job, as you do. There's always other things that, catch your fancy. Also bought the Gorka Morka starter set. That looked like a lot of fun. Never really got to play that either. But, so I was familiar with Total War, or not Total War, with Warhammer before I ever became aware of Total War, actually. Just never really got a chance to play. And I really liked the whole, the lore and stuff of Nagash. So seeing the Tomb Kings finally in Total War Warhammer, I've been loving it. I love the crafting system. I really hope they implement that for everybody. With tailoring for each faction, obviously. You don't want to give a lot of, you want to leave some things to help the Tomb Kings stay unique as a faction. But, like the dwarves, they can have like rune weapons and rune armor and maybe like rune items. Just give them like 3 sets of things that they can craft. The Bretonnians like banners and barding for their horses and some stuff like that, faction specific stuff, because not only is it just cool, it makes the trade resources mean something, which anytime in a game, any game really, but anytime in a game like Total War, and you already have something like trade resources, but pretty much in all the games, all they mean is money. They don't do anything. Now they can, and that's great. So I really hope they do implement that for all the factions. I've really enjoyed everything I've seen for the Tomb King so far. The only other thing I can think of that I'd like to see, I'm curious what all the factions will be for the 3rd game. I'm thinking Chaos Demons for sure. But the other thing I'd love to see them implement, since they've done like the laboratory, is a full tilt RPG experience sort of thing. Still in the Total War style, though. What I'm talking about is allowing players to create their own legendary lord and play as that legendary lord. And it wouldn't really be that hard, because what you'd do is that you'd let them choose a faction, which, establishes the units they have access to. So, you'd have, like, the various factions for Tomb Kings. It would either be Tomb Kings or followers of Nagash. So, either Archon's army set or the straight Tomb Kings army set. And then the same for all the other factions. and then you would allow them to choose a model, and maybe kind of like the laboratory stuff, but with a little bit of, you just give them some options. The players some options to change the models around a little bit, change the colors, to customize it just a little bit. And then you'd have something like, I don't know, like you take all the traits from the other legendary lords, and you come up with all the variations that you can think of for those, and you just assign them point costs based on how powerful they are in relation to the other legendary lords, just so you can, and it doesn't really matter what the points are. You can do it like, okay, like Kalita has this, 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 and this, and those are comparable to all the others, so each one of them is worth 100 points, and every legendary lord has roughly 600 points. I'm just off the top of my head here, 600 points worth of traits. So this new legendary lord, 600 points worth of traits. And then you have the selection of traits that they can choose from until, they've got their 600 point allotment. And then you could also add in some negative traits, like a debuff to charge damage or something to get back 100 points, and then, they could customize their own legendary lord that way. Give them their own name and all that stuff. It would just add, it would infinite replay value, basically. Okay, not infinite, but everybody would want to play as their own legendary lord for at least the factions that they like the most. So that would add a huge amount of replay value. I'd love to see that implemented. It'd be great. So that's what my thoughts on what they're doing so far. Let's get to the actual topic of the video. What could they do in the future? Now, I don't think they should pursue any other fantasy-based settings, unless they come up with their own setting. Now, you might think, why not? I didn't say fictional, I specified fantasy. Okay, because the problem is that most fantasy settings tend to be either high fantasy or low fantasy. Then there's also sword and sorcery. Now, I can see them doing like a Conan the Barbarian game. That could be very interesting. That's sword and sorcery, that's not fantasy. Sword and sorcery is kind of off in its own corner of the bookstore. Not really, but you know what I mean. It's kind of its own thing. So I could see him doing like a Conan the Barbarian Total War. That could be interesting. Because it would... it would be interesting, but I don't know how well it would sell, because the variety issue, which again is the main issue I have with doing other fantasy settings. The problem you'd run into is that you'd end up with the game that would feel like just another historical title set in a fictional place, or it would end up feeling like a lesser version of Warhammer. Because Warhammer being a tabletop war game first, it fit Total War perfectly. And any other fantasy tabletop war game is just going to feel too familiar to Warhammer. And anything, again, that's more of a low fantasy setting is just going to feel like a historical title. But set somewhere else. So it's not really going to offer anything new. And you can talk about something like Lord of the Rings. Well, again, it has so much less variety than Warhammer. And it is not built around battles. As far as gaming is concerned, it is perfect for an RPG, which is why there is, or at least there used to be, an RPG of Lord of the Rings. Well, there is a tabletop version, a pen and paper one. I'm not sure if the online one is still around. But Lord of the Rings works fine as an RPG setting, but not so much for big battles. Yes, there are a lot of battles in Lord of the Rings, but there's a limit to the factions. There's not very many of them, really. There's not much variety between those factions in terms of units and whatnot. So it wouldn't really offer anything that Warhammer doesn't have more of. Plus, Lord of the Rings would be an incredibly expensive thing to license to do a game based on. For something that would probably be a one and done game, it would probably make their they would make their money based on the name alone, probably. But as far as doing something different, something past, something, not the same old again. That was kind of their problem after their initial really great run of Total War games. They just started repeating themselves. And they've moved away from that, luckily. So I think if they want to really keep the momentum going that they've built up, they need to explore new areas. Don't just do another fantasy setting. If they want to explore more Warhammer titles, that's fine. Keep going with what you've established. There's nothing wrong with that. But don't just go, okay, we're done with Warhammer. Let's move on to whatever now. That's going to be basically Warhammer, but by a different name. Don't do that. Historical titles will be fine. There's plenty of history for them to explore, plenty of things for them to mess around with it as far as history is concerned. And in fact, one of the ways they could do more, not necessarily fictional games, but they could do mythological, which is what put this topic in my head, was Heir of Carthage playing Age of Empires mythology, Age of Mythology. Is that they could kind of draw on that and do, like, another... they've done Rome to death, but they could do, the ancient world again, but with mythology. Mythological units and acts of the gods and things like that. 60% historical, 40% mythological. And you could actually take that concept in different directions. Like, I'm a fan of H.P. Lovecraft. I love Lovecraftian horror. They could do something like 60% historical, 40% Lovecraftian horror elements. Exactly how they would implement that, I'm not sure right offhand. But, it's just the idea of it, the potential. They don't have to... they can do what they're familiar with, but put a different spin on it, is one direction they could take. Another area they could pursue is something like, something really different. The World of Darkness series. Again, I'm going to reference and talk about things that I'm familiar with, settings that I know pretty well, and how they might be able to implement it. Because this is just ideas. This is just... I don't have any idea what they will do. I'm just talking about what could they do. What could be an interesting path to take? What could be some other settings they could explore? Some styles of games that they could do, some changes. Because, another way they could spiff up, spruce up the historical games is to incorporate some of the Age of Empires and Civilization sort of elements. Kind of a hybrid. A little bit more Civilization builder instead of just conquest game. Where you actually have to start off with low technology, and, your researching isn't just based on, marginal increases to what you can and can't do over the course of your gameplay, but actually you have to research your new technologies, actual technologies and stuff. The same Total War basics that everybody enjoys from Total War games, but increase the time scale, and incorporate, like I said, some of those civilization builder elements would be one way that they could spruce up the historical titles, change things up, make it different. But World of Darkness is a really, really good setting. It's no longer being worked on. That they kind of finished it. I mean, it was around for decades, I think. Yeah, long, long time. And White Wolf, the publishing company that was putting it out, basically decided, okay, we've done everything that we can really do, and some of the resource books are getting silly at this point. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up. So they did. Then, they kind of have been redoing it in a different way, but the old school original World of Darkness is just kind of there now. Great setting, loads and loads of material to work with. Not really keyed towards wargaming, because it's a tabletop role-playing game. But you could do it as a war game, a total war type of war game, by tackling the end of the world, basically, where you can explore the idea of the various supernatural factions basically being revealed to the world and having to fight for the fate of the world. Again, this is just stuff, brainstorming, just ideas. That one would be really difficult, because you'd have to completely do all the battle stuff from scratch, all the units and everything. There's tons and tons of material to work with, so it wouldn't be like they'd have to just spring it entirely from the depths of their own imaginations. Ex nihilo. Or exfit. What? It's ex nihilo, exfit. Nothing comes from nothing. But they wouldn't have to just spontaneously create new things. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of material in the World of Darkness setting that they can draw from. What I'm saying is that it's not a war game, so they'd have to, work it into that context. Plus, they'd have to tackle modern warfare, which is an issue that they haven't, or not an issue, but it's not something they've dealt with yet. They've stuck pretty much to the types of warfare where it's two lines on either side of a field and you go towards each other, or you force one to come to you. One's line of battle has to go towards the other. You know what I'm talking about. They haven't really tackled things like World War I trench warfare, World War II urban street-to-street warfare, where they would have to have buildings and terrain that you could move in and out of, and start incorporating cover mechanics. They've done that some with the Empire games, obviously. But you'd have to deal with smaller unit sizes and very different tactics, and it would require kind of an overhaul to the entire battle system. So, but still, World of Darkness has a lot of interesting possibilities. Then we could also talk about another game, Shadowrun. Similar situation. Sorry about that, pardon me. A little bit of a dry throat. Let me get a drink right quick. Oh, that's better. Okay. Shadowrun is an incredibly interesting setting. It's one of my all-time favorite settings, because it very seamlessly incorporates both fantasy and sci-fi, in that it's a world where magic is returned, and that has created its own issues, while at the same time technology has advanced, and you have cybernetics and like the deckers that plug into the cyberspace sort of thing. I can't remember what they call it. this cyberpunk universe mixed with high fantasy. And again, it's a tabletop role-playing game, but very easy to take that into a total war style game because it has the megacorporations. And that would be your end right there. The megacorporations go to war with each other. Global dominance, who's going to come out on top. And they have their mercenary armies and gangs of shadow runners pulling runs on the other corporation, megacorps, and all that stuff. And you have the smaller corporations who are struggling to survive in this corporate warfare of the future. So that would offer a hell of a lot of material as well to work with. You could make it for some very interesting gaming right there. So those two very interesting possibilities, but difficult, since they're not really based around open warfare to begin with, but very interesting possibilities. Now, some games that would actually lend themselves better to a war game, a total war type of game to begin with, the obvious sci-fi one is BattleTech. They would have to make very few changes to what they've already got to do a BattleTech game. Because we're talking about big robots, mechs. That's what BattleTech is about. It started off as a tabletop game as well, so there's already plenty of material to work with in that regard. You can also have infantry and tanks and stuff like that. And again, a lot of it takes place in open fields, open terrain. Yet they would need to incorporate more types of terrain to really get the feel of BattleTech. You're talking about robots that are up to like 100 foot tall, 120 foot tall, so you would need bigger scales to start with, bigger scale maps, and more terrain. Bigger terrain. Which wouldn't be that difficult, really, because it's been done. The Mech Warrior games, which were first-person shooter types. Then there's also Mech Commander. Now, Mech Commander is where they would need to draw most of their inspiration from, I think. But it could be done. Simply a matter of alterations of scale and increasing scale. But BattleTech would probably be the best and easiest fit for Total War. If you wanted to talk about space gaming, well, actually that brings up, I almost overlooked it. The major overhaul for a BattleTech game would be campaign map, actually. But then they wouldn't have to do much there either, because instead of having cities and provinces, they could simply do like solar systems and planets, or even like solar systems and groups of solar systems or whatever. So that, they wouldn't have to change up things too much. It would just depend on how micro or macro you wanted to get with that. The same would go with like a 40k game. Again, with a 40k game, you would have to incorporate more modern warfare and the tactics involved, and you're dealing with smaller unit sizes. Because in 40k, Warhammer 40k, the Imperial Guard have big unit sizes, but then the Space Marines tend to be very small, elite armies. Then you have like the Tyranids and the Orcs that are big units. So, you could definitely do Warhammer 40k as a Total War game. It would just take some tweaking. You'd have to deal with the issues of modern style warfare on the battle maps and everything that entails. Campaign map wise, you can do the same sort of thing as like I talked about with BattleTech. It would, or even on one planet. if you want to draw on some of the lore of Warhammer 40k and just do a single planet where lots of factions are fighting. But that's a little small scale. You know, one of the entire points of doing something like BattleTech or 40k would be being able to travel to other planets. Pardon me. So those would both work as Total War games. It would just take some tweaking. If you wanted to talk about space warfare, return to that. The one series that pops into my head right off the bat is Honor Harrington. I've only read one of the books, but I really enjoyed it. And it had a lot of stuff in it about space warfare, space battles. I know there's other ones out there. That's just the one that pops into my head. Because I'm not a huge sci-fi fan. More fantasy, comedic fantasy, actually, the books I prefer. So, Robert Asprin's Myth series, Discworld, that sort of stuff. That's just the stuff I enjoy. And I would do something like Honor Harrington before I'd say Star Wars or Star Trek, because it's been done. It's predictable. It would be very expensive to license. Go with something off the beaten path. If they would want to go in the direction of space warfare and spaceships fighting, do something off the beaten path. And then there's one other game that pops into my head that would be very intriguing, and that's Rifts. It's an older game. It's still around. Tabletop RPG, pen and paper. But it has enormous amounts of hardware that they can draw on for units. And again, it's another one that incorporates fantasy and sci-fi. Actually kind of similar to Shadowrun, only very, very different execution and outcomes. In Shadowrun, magic returns and changes the entire world, and mayhem ensues, but life goes on. In Rifts, magic returns and almost kills everyone. In fact, the main storyline of Rifts picks up, I think it's like 100 years after magic returned, because it just fucked everything up that bad. I think it was 100 years. It may have been even longer than that. Can't remember right offhand. It's been a long time. Because almost everybody died. Might be more like several hundred years. Can't remember. Doesn't matter. But Rifts would be interesting because you have lots of... There's the fantasy magic elements. Then you also have loads of hardware you can draw on in terms of mecha and soldier gear, all that stuff. Lots of crazy-ass sci-fi weaponry. Robot armor suits, power armor suits, flying power armor suits. Plus you have the possibility of incorporating some weird-ass dimensional travel mechanics, which is a big part of Rifts, is DBs, they call them, dimensional beings. Which, because Rifts explores the idea of things from other dimensions coming to ours to pay a visit, you never know if it wants to chat with you or eat your face until it's trying to do one or the other. So you have all that stuff in there. There's also space travel, because Rifts is an expansive game universe. I mean, it is actually huge. It's been around for a long, long time, and it's got a lot of stuff to offer. I believe it's put out by Palladium Games. I think that's the name of the company. No, am I mixing up two companies? I think I'm mixing up two companies. Rifts is its own thing, and then Palladium. Maybe it is the same company. Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Although fantasy setting-wise, Palladium is another one that can be very interesting, because that's a very interesting and kind of a unique game system and a series of fantasy games as well. I don't know how well you can do a Total War side of a game, but it's a very interesting setting. It is the same company. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I think it is the same company, but it doesn't matter. So Rifts could be a very interesting one that they can explore. As far as factions, because you always have to consider unique factions. You need different factions fighting. BattleTech easy. Warhammer 40k very easy. So this is another tabletop war game. White Wolf, the World of Darkness stuff, there are different factions. Again, Shadowrun, very easy. The mega corporations. The factions aren't the issue there. It'd be more like, how do you take something that's an RPG and turn it into a total war game. Difficult, but lots of possibilities and interesting potential there. BattleTech would be the easiest one. 40k would be also pretty easy as far as factions go. It'd be the execution of how you would make the game. It would be the hard part there. Rifts, lots of stuff to draw on, lots of, that one would be very easy to come up with units and things, but again, it would be more small scale unit sizes, and there are factions involved, but humanity is kind of a sparse race in the world of Rifts. So, well, at least on Earth it is. Because humanity doesn't just exist on Earth. Plus there are, like Atlantis exists in the world of Rifts, and it's risen again with the return of magic, and it's controlled by kind of a Lovecraftian extra-dimensional monster. It's like a giant eyeball in a body and tentacles and crazy monster stuff. If you've never heard of Rifts, check it out. It's great. All kinds of cool shit there. They'd have tons and tons and tons of stuff to draw on with that. It would be hard to make it into a Total War game in terms of coming up with factions and doing the maps. The overall world. The story involved in the world and conquest and everything. There's stuff that they could draw on, but that one might almost be a case of too much to draw on. It is like, where in the hell do they start? Might be an issue, but still a potential. It's a very interesting setting. Has a lot of potential. Same with Shadowrun. The obvious one with Shadowrun would be the megacorps going to war with each other. But again, you'd have to deal with things like, what would the armies consist of? It'd mostly be mercenaries, cyborg mercenaries and regular infantry, and then you could have Shadowrunners as your agents. And you could also get into stuff there like being able to customize your units with their, what cybernetics they have, and the same with your Shadowrunner agents. You could, that can be their skill trees, as what kind of cybernetics they have or what kind of spells they have access to, all that stuff. Kind of, very similar to Warhammer. You just kind of put a sci-fi spin on some of the different units. BattleTech. There's tons of established mech designs that they could draw on, but allowing you to make your own mech designs would be cool. And again, because that started off as a tabletop war game, and mechanics-wise, it would be very easy to slide BattleTech into a Total War framework for the most part. And 40k, again, would be pretty simple in terms of, just like with Warhammer. It took work for them to do Warhammer in Total War, but they pulled it off very well. 40k, the biggest challenge would be the different kinds of unit scales involved, and you would have to incorporate more terrain features and the ability to move in and out of cover and actually move into buildings and other terrain features for cover, and things like artillery and tanks firing their weapons, and flying units, jets, fighters that can actually zip around the battlefield, you know, bikes that can move real fast. There would be a lot of new mechanics they would have to work on for like a 40K game. But anything set outside of medieval warfare style, even a fantasy game, Warhammer is still kind of rooted in medieval sort of warfare, historical warfare. So anything sci-fi or modern, they would have to deal with new mechanics and deal with that stuff and work that out. Sad but true. It would just be a necessity. But, like I said, this is just some things that they could explore. Just some ideas, you know, some, just speculation, I suppose. Not even speculation so much as wishful thinking, perhaps. And overall, just, my thoughts on the topic of what should they do? What could they do? Anything they want. What should they do? I think they should explore some new avenues. I think they should explore sci-fi and tackle the issues of modern warfare in the Total War game system. Eventually they're going to have to do it. They can't just do historical, old, ancient world titles forever. Eventually they're going to have to deal with the issue of small unit sizes, tactics, terrain features that you interact with, and other other things that you have to do for modern style warfare. Eventually they're going to have to do it. So, they tackled a lot of new stuff with Warhammer. A lot of new stuff. They brought in things that you never thought you'd ever see in a Warhammer or a Total War game. So they've already started taking those steps. It's, explore sci-fi. Try some, Battletech, like I said, Battletech would fit easily and not require too much in the way of new mechanics. So explore something like Battletech. And everybody loves giant robots. Well, okay, most people love giant robots. Who doesn't like giant robots? Battletech would probably be the best next move. Battletech and or 40K. Warhammer 40K. One of those two. Then, the options that, I've talked about a variety of options that they can explore, and I'd love to see them explore some of them. I'd love to see Shadowrun get some love, because it doesn't get any these days. The World of Darkness, that's more like a way out there sort of idea, but it's possible. It would be very interesting. Shadowrun, kind of out there, but it would be very interesting. Rifts offers a hell of a lot of material they could work with, and a lot of potential and a lot of opportunities. Rifts would be very interesting, but again, kind of difficult. So, out of all the suggestions, things like historical but with mythology would be easy to implement and interesting. Like historical but with Lovecraftian stuff would be fairly easy and interesting to implement. And then exploring sci-fi, Battletech would be pretty easy. 40K would be pretty easy. Each one bringing its own battle map and campaign map challenges that they would have to work on. But then, once they work out the issues with those, it's just a matter of moving on to the next thing. And once you have all that stuff worked out, you can basically do whatever the hell you want. You know, like I said, if they do like a 40K Warhammer game, they can work out all the issues of how they implement modern warfare, you know, and all the stuff that goes along with that in their battle map mechanics. And then once they work it out there, they can do World War I, World War II type games. You know, it opens up new avenues for them to explore, even in their historical titles. So there you go. That's kind of what I think about the potential future of Total War when it comes to fictional games and even some of their historical stuff. Honestly, in terms of just fantasy settings and stuff, I can't think of anything that would really work. Like I said, it's either going to be something that would just feel like another Warhammer by another name, or it'll feel like it's just a historical game set in a fictional setting. Or you have to deal with issues like Wheel of Time is a really interesting setting. It's got a lot of battles in it, but all of the infantry and stuff is just standard infantry. There's nothing significant about it. What makes the battles interesting, well, they're not really, it's not interesting, it's more gory and disgusting in the end, is the magical system of the Wheel of Time series, which is so OP that it would be useless as far as a game mechanic is concerned. You couldn't use it. It wouldn't work. So, you know, that those are the issues you face when trying to do something fictional as a game. It isn't going to work all the time. So I think they've done fantasy as far as genres go. If they wanted to try to come up with something all their own, completely original, that would be interesting. But honestly, I think there's probably still more they could explore in the Warhammer setting beyond the 3 games that they're going to do. If they want to do more fantasy setting games, just stick with Warhammer, basically. Because no other setting is going to offer as much as Warhammer already offers. It's not going to... None of them are really going to offer anything different or new. So, you know, if they want to pursue something really different and new, sci-fi or sci-fantasy settings would be the way to go. Or again, like Shadowrun cyberpunk setting, or a steampunk thing. Historical, but steampunk would be very interesting. They would have to come up with all their own shit for something like that, because I'm not sure that there's any established settings that you could really do for a war game. But it could be very interesting to see like a steampunk historical title. Well, you know what I mean. Alt history title. Alt historical. So, you know, those are some of my thoughts on that subject. Let me know what you think with the comments. Leave a like if you thought it was interesting, like the video, whatever. Dislike if you didn't. Although, you know, either way, please leave a comment. Even, you know, leave a comment just to say hi if you want. Don't forget to share with your friends. Subscribe so you know when I put up other videos. I don't do a lot of Total War stuff for the reasons I already went over until I can get the new computer and start playing more Total War. Start playing Total War games. And recording them and putting the videos up and whatnot. So on and so forth. But anyway, thank you very much for listening. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.